This morning we are going to look at a couple of readings from 1 Samuel. And the first one is from 1 Samuel chapter 5 verses 1 to 12. And the second reading is from the very next chapter, 1 Samuel 6 verses 1 to 12. So you might want to pause at this point and first go read the readings and return again, or you could just keep on listening because I will be referring to the verses as we go along. So here in 1 Samuel chapter 5 we have a description of the ark being carried into Philistine territory. Of course we know that the ark was captured. They captured the ark of the covenant, and now they're bringing it into a city called Ashdod, Philistine city, and of course they, as we see in verse 2, they carried the ark into the temple of their god Dagon. And they put it in there, and of course we find in verse 3, when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. Wow, quite amazing. Well, what do? They simply set Dagon upright again. And look what happens the next day. Verse 4, the following morning, when they rose, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. But that's not all. His head and hands had been broken off and were lying on the threshold. Only his body remained. Wow, amazing. Second time. 2 days in a row this happens. Second day worse, because his head's broken off and his hands, and of course they are lying there on the threshold. Now in verse 6 we read, the Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod and its vicinity. He brought devastation upon them and afflicted them with tumors. And when the men of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not stay here with us, because his hand is heavy upon us and upon Dagon our God. And then, of course, we find that what happens is the ark gets sent from city to city, like a hot potato, really. So it goes from Ashdod to Gath. You'll read that in verses 8 and 9 of 1 Samuel 5. But the same thing happens again in Gath. We have the devastation and the boils. And then the people of Gath say, no, let's send this ark to Ekron. And they send it off there, and when it arrives in Ekron, and this we read in verse 10, the people of Ekron cried out, they have brought the ark of the God of Israel around to us to kill us and our people. So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and said, send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place. For death had filled the city with panic, and God's hand was very heavy upon it. And those who did not die were afflicted with tumors. Verse 12. And the outcry of the city went up to heaven. Now I want us to keep all of these things in mind, because in the end we're going to pull it all together and see what God was actually trying to do here in the Philistine country. Of course, you remember the circumstances surrounding the capturing of the ark. It was a national calamity for Israel. And Eli, of course, the high priest at the time, when he was brought the news, he fell over backward, broke his neck. It was it said even his heart, there was a shudder in his heart, maybe something like a heart attack, when he got the news that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken. And from an Israelite perspective, it was a national calamity. But I want us to see this morning that the Lord is more than able to protect his name and to glorify his name. There they put his ark in the temple of Dagon, and for 2 days in a row, Dagon is on his face before the ark when they arrive there in the morning, and the second time, of course, with his head and his hands broken off. God was actually just saying, all right, let's go and speak a little bit in the Philistine cities and in the Philistine country. It's quite a marvelous story. And look at how loudly he is speaking to these Philistines. Now that's the picture I want us to take with us as we move through this message here. Now, we find that the ark moves from Ashdod to Gath to Ekron, and there's this cry that goes up to heaven, it says at the end of chapter 5 of 1 Samuel. Now, when the ark, this is chapter 6, 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1, when the ark of the Lord had been in Philistine territory 7 months, the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it back to its place. They wanted to get rid of it. Now, this reminds us somewhat of what happened to Jesus. Remember when he was in the region of the Gerasenes, we read in the Gospels, and he had driven the legion of demons out of the man there who was living among the tombs and into the herd of pigs. If you go read there, it's quite interesting. And why I'm thinking about that here is that these people came to Jesus. It clearly says that. They came to him and asked him to leave their region because he was causing such upheaval. And so it connects quite nicely with our reading here. They said, let's get rid of this ark. It is causing too much upheaval. But of course, God was trying to speak with them. He was trying to get through to them. Maybe a message of, listen, how about your God here? Look at him. Flat on his face before me, the God of Israel, twice. The ark, he's trying to speak to them about their own gods. But of course, the message does not quite get through. They say, let's get rid of this thing. Just like they said to Jesus, please leave this area. You're just causing trouble. And yet he had done this unbelievable miracle. He had just performed this amazing miracle of setting this man free. But of course they were not interested in that. They were interested in having their lives remain as they were, the status quo, to be preserved. So let's move on through chapter 6 of 1 Samuel. Now here, as we saw just now, the priests are called in and they are asked, all right, how must we send this thing back? And they prescribe a certain way. Don't send it away empty, they say in verse 3. There has to be some gold, some golden symbols of the tumors and rats and so forth. We find that in verse 4, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats, according to the Philistine rulers. Make models of the tumors, verse 5, and of the rats that are destroying the country, and pay honor to Israel's God. Perhaps he will lift his hand from you and your gods and your land. Why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh did when he treated them harshly? Did they not send the Israelites out so that they could go on their way? Wow, I was struck by this, to see that these Philistines knew about the Exodus. They knew what had happened to Pharaoh. And it makes the situation all the more worse, all the more ridiculous if you think about the fact that they had encountered this God before in the stories about the Exodus. To me, it just says, wow, you even have that information, and still God is not getting through to you regarding the fact that your own gods are powerless. But let's leave that for the moment. We move along because that's more to do with our conclusion at the end. Now, I want us to study very carefully and closely the way that the priests prescribed that the ark has to be sent back. So listen to this, and this is from verse 7 of 1 Samuel chapter 6. Now then, get a new cart ready with 2 young cows that have calved and have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take their calves away and pen them up. Take the ark of the Lord and put it on the cart, and in a chest beside it put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Send it on its way, but keep watching it. If it goes up to its own territory toward Beth Shemesh, the Israelite territory, then the Lord has brought this great disaster on us. But if it does not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us and that it happened to us by chance. And then we see in verse 10, so they did this. They took 2 young cows and hitched them to the cart and pinned up their calves, placed the ark of the Lord on the cart along with its chest containing the gold rats and the models of the tumors. And then, of course, the cows start walking. Now, I want us to look at this very carefully. Do you see what the Philistines are trying to achieve here? They say, all right, let's take the cart, let's take a couple of young cows, take their calves away from them, yoke them, they've never been yoked, and then they have to walk straight to the Israelite territory. So tell me, what are they actually trying to prove here? Do you see that they are actually trying to prove that everything that had happened to them was just coincidence? Because if we think about it logically, what would these 2 young cows do straight away? And there's another clue for us. If you look at verse 12. Now look at verse 12 of 1 Samuel chapter 6. It says, then the cows went straight up toward Beth Shemesh, keeping on the road and lowing all the way. So these cows were actually wanting to return to their calves as the Philistines set it up to happen, really. A couple of young cows, never been yoked, calves taken away from them. And we know that by instinct they would have wanted to return to their calves, no question about it. And we even have that confirmed for us in the fact that they're lowing all the way, but they're walking. Strangely enough, none of the things that the Philistines were expecting would happen actually happens. No, the cows do not return to their calves. They remain in the yoke. Wow. They walk straight to Israelite territory, even though they're lowing for their calves, but some higher hand is actually compelling them to walk in that direction. And why does God do this? Well, let's think about it carefully. The Philistines wanted to set it up in order to prove that the whole thing was just coincidence. God causes those cows to walk straight towards Israelite territory, to act completely contrary to instinct, in order then to prove to the Philistines that, no, it was actually me. It was God's hand on you. I'm trying to speak with you. I'm revealing myself to you. And what I find very interesting is that in the end, there's no mention of the Philistines actually saying, oh wow, this is amazing. We've just proven It's just been proven to us that this was not coincidence, that it was actually the hand of the God of Israel. And of course, at this point, we need to draw the line through to our own lives. Is this not exactly what we do? God is trying to get through to us through this circumstance or that circumstance, but we're blind and deaf. Because we have an idea, a preconceived idea, of what we would like to see, what we would like to have happen, what we would like him to do. And so we set things up in our minds as guidelines, just like the Philistines did. Let's set it up in this way, and then it will prove, no, this is not God speaking at all. This is actually just life happening. And I'm wondering how many messages we miss. How many times God speaks, but we're not hearing because of our preconceived ideas. But not only our preconceived ideas, let's look very carefully at what is happening here. They are refusing to be convinced. We have it twice with Dagon. Not only does he fall over the first day, he falls over the second day, and his hands are broken off in his head the next day. But what do? Do they say, wow, there's something about this God of Israel, let's look into it? No, they simply don't step on the threshold anymore of their temple because Dagon's hand fell. It's ridiculous. Secondly, of course, the three cities, God is trying to show them something. They just send it away, get rid of this ark, send it away to the next city. And then this whole situation with the cart and the cows and the calves and so forth. So what we find here is, in fact, a stubborn refusal to be persuaded. And I want us just, in closing, to go and look at a couple of scriptures. Because in the original Greek, there is a word which has unfortunately been translated as disobedience. I just want us to go and look at two scriptures. So let's go to Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 2. And there we read, "As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit, who is now at work in those who are disobedient." So we have this word, this Greek word, apitheia. Apitheia. A better translation probably of that word would be unbelief, but an even better translation of the word would be a stubborn refusal to be persuaded. That's actually what the Greek word apitheia means. Let's go somewhere else where it is used, and that is in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 6. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 6. And there we read, "It still remains that some will enter that rest, and those who formerly had the gospel preached to them did not go in because of their disobedience." But again, it's the same word used there, apitheia, unbelief, but not quite unbelief. The translation should be a stubborn refusal to be persuaded. So, isn't that what we see here with the Philistines? There is a stubborn refusal to be persuaded. Even though the Lord is speaking, shouting through their circumstances, they refuse to be persuaded. And perhaps there's a lesson for us here, because we should not think we're any better than these Philistines. God is a speaking God. He communicates 100 times a day through 100 different things. Nature even shouts about him. He is forever revealing himself. And perhaps we need to ask ourselves, Lord, what is there that you are trying to show me, but I am stubbornly refusing to see because of my own preconceived ideas? And if you take that message away today, as I have had to do from this very scripture, what a blessing that would be. Amen.